Good evening and welcome to our weekly book study. We are, as you know, probably know, we're studying Christian Anarchism, written by Alexander Christianopoulos, who first wrote it as his doctoral thesis. And the purpose for it was to place in one place all the writings of various authors over time, so to illustrate this Christian anarchism. And so that's very convenient for us, that we can now, we don't have to read the whole thing, we can just take this summary and read that. The good news is that the first chapter which we're ending tonight, this is going to be our last session in the first chapter, is that it's downloadable from the internet, and in the group invitation there should be a link for you to do that if you want to study it more on your own. So this is one of two outreach events that we have here at the New Covenant House on Tuesdays and on Wednesdays. On Tuesdays we talk about intentional communities and how they function and try to learn from each other, and here on Wednesdays we talk about books or writings or study the Bible or whatever, that sort of thing. It's kind of a routine that we have here because routines are good. People hate routines, but they really calms you down and your expectations will never really be upset when you have rules like that in your life. So this chapter tonight is pretty short, so I think we're going to read most of it. And it's kind of a summary of the whole chapter we just did. And the conclusion is that Christian anarchism deals with two things. Number one is a criticism of the state. And we're going to hear more about that in subsequent chapters, 3 and 4 particularly, I think. And the other thing it does is it's a blueprint for life as Christian, in living in Christian community. And that's being talked about in chapter 5. So we are going to be in this book for quite a while, I imagine. Let's see. Yeah, let's just start reading. So we'll probably stop here and there and kind of like make some commentary on what we're reading. So it's a manifesto for Christian anarchism, which is kind of the conclusion of this whole book, actually. Or definitely, the Sermon on the Mount is a manifesto for Christian anarchism. Jesus' reinterpretation of the old law for Christian anarchists therefore amounts both to a set of indirect, implied criticisms of the state, theory and practice. That was the first thing we talked about. And to a blueprint for the life of Christian community, that was the other thing we talked about. A theme which is elaborated in chapter 5, I just mentioned that as well. So there are only 6 chapters in the book, so we are pretty much going to have to read the whole book. Which brings me to mention that this is the last time that you can get away with downloading the chapter from the internet. From this point on, you're going to need to have the book itself, and it's purchasable from not too many places, I don't think, but definitely from Amazon. Christian Book doesn't seem to have it, and it's kind of expensive, but what can you do? Get the Kindle version. I have the actual physical book because reading from the Kindle version and navigating the software to make this available at the same time, I just can't do it. I need a physical book. So I have that. And there are actually two versions of this book. There are an abridged version, which is the one I have, and there's a full hardcover version, which with all the commentary in it as well. And that's actually the one that is very similar to the Kindle version. So yeah, if you want the whole thing, get the Kindle version or the hardcover version. Anyway, so here it continues here. The sermon is thus a political document, a manifesto for the Christian anarchist society. It touches on all the main points of the Christian, and then he puts in parentheses anarchist, political vision, and how to reach it. So when he puts anarchist in parentheses here, he kind of equates anarchism with Christianity. I don't think that's what he said at the beginning, though. And I don't think that's exactly what he means either. So what it means is that Christianity and anarchism are not two separate philosophies. He tried to join them together. And they're not the same either. They're not equal. So that makes it a little difficult to navigate. But what I think is happening is that anarchism always existed from the beginning of time. And Jesus came from the beginning of time. He is God. He was there before time began. So he now articulates this for us. And anything that he teaches is anarchism. So, in other words, anarchism is inherent in Christianity. It's a part of Christianity. It's not the whole Christianity, but it's part of it. And it just has so happened that the term anarchism came about when Peter Kropotkin wrote his book. I forgot the name of it. But the idea that he is, I think it's a mutual aid book. He has a couple of books. And where he talks about Darwin and the survival of the fittest. Humanity is not where we are today because of survival of the fittest, but because we were able to work together in community with one another. So that's how the name anarchist was kind of used. Kropotkin was the first one to kind of use it. So, but it's been around. The concept has been around way before Kropotkin, and I argue also before Jesus came to the earth. Anyway, Day. Dorothy Day is the co-founder of Catholic Worker Cooperatives. She writes that the sermon answered all the questions as to how to love God and one's brother. And that's found in The Long Loneliness, the book she wrote. It's called The Long Loneliness. It amounts to a complete philosophical, moral, and social doctrine, says Tolstoy. For him, Jesus gives mankind practical rules for life, which would lift it from the vicious cycle of violence it is caught in and move it towards the kingdom of peace on earth. And we already talked a little bit about rules for life. Is kind of have a structure in your life like we try to have here at New Covenant House. But it's more than that, yeah. Okay, so here we have more. Tolstoy, moreover, rejects the view that the sermon, this vital Christian teaching, is impracticable. And we're going to hear more about being practical a little bit later. Let me see if I can find it here. It's Morin who talks. Morin, actually the other founder of Catholic worker cooperatives. He says that the Sermon on the Mount will be called practical when Christians make up their mind to practice it. So all that is missing is the people aren't really doing what Jesus is telling you to do. So Tolstoy accepts that it might be difficult, but believes that what matters is constant progress in this direction. So when we were reading the Plan B book, we came across this word difficult also, because Dave Andrews says it's not going to be easy to control yourself when people are annoying you. It's very easy to get angry. So Tolstoy says it might be difficult, and it obviously is. For him, these commandments are, as it were, signposts on the infinite road to perfection towards which mankind is moving. So this search for perfection, I mean, I'm not really sure what to say about that, because it kind of resembles a little bit this idea that we can reach perfection on our own, like the Pharisees were trying to do. The more you follow the rules, the better you would get into heaven. And I don't think that's what we are supposed to be doing, but yeah. So perfection is a different term, and we have heard about that before in Yoder. Yoder was writing about be perfect as God is perfect. So that's a different kind of perfection Jesus is talking about here. And I imagine Tolstoy as well. That this road may be difficult does not make the commandments any less binding. Jesus' words may be hard words, quips Morin. Again, that was the co-founder of Catholic Cooperatives. He's quoting Stevenson, says, but the hard words of the book were the only reason why the book was written. So, and he goes on here, of course, to show that this Christian anarchist, and again he puts anarchist in parentheses, equating anarchism with Christianity. Of course, to show that this Christian, in parentheses, anarchist manifesto is not impossible utopian. Those who claim to follow Christ and need to live by it. Morin writes in his typical playful style that the Sermon on the Mount would be called practical when Christians make up their mind to practice it. I just said that before. Yet, as Andrews, quoting Kurt Vonnegut, bemoans, the most vocal Christians demand that the 10 Commandments be posted in public buildings, but none of them demand that the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, be posted anywhere. Christians seem to elevate the old law as the ideal to live up to, but not the teaching of the teacher that they profess to follow. Christian anarchists wish the same energy and commitment were given to the sermon. What a nice place this world would be, writes Morin, if fundamentalist Protestants tried to exemplify the Sermon on the Mount. So there's a term there that I want to comment on a little bit. Fundamentalist Protestants. I assume that most of you who listen to this would know a fellow named Billy Graham. He was like an evangelist who held huge rallies all around the country. and went to Moscow, I think. And he started out as a fundamentalist Protestant. He went to forgot the name, college. There's like really, really fundamentalist Bible interpretation. 6 days of creation were literally 6 days. So he came to realize that he disagreed with at least some of what people were saying, and he came up. I don't know if it was actually him, but he was one of the leaders in the now evangelical Christian movement. So to distinguish themselves apart from these fundamentalists, they call themselves evangelicals. Still very conservative, but a little bit more reasonable. And that's another discussion that we have with Shane Claiborne, is one of the people who have thought about this. We are serious about what Jesus taught us, and in some ways we are fundamentalists because we do believe that he was onto something. But unfortunately, the term evangelical had been taken already by some other people whose understanding of what Jesus is teaching is very different from ours. So he and some other people came up with the term red letter Christians, so that to signify that we are people who really take his words seriously. So there's many things to discuss in this chapter, even though it's kind of short. So the next paragraph, I think I'm going to skip that because it doesn't really say much. Yeah. So the last paragraph in this chapter is kind of like a summary of the summary. It says, in short, Christian anarchists take seriously the political implications of Jesus' instructions, especially non-resistance of evil. And we started, especially Tolstoy talks a lot about that. Tolstoy claims that it should be the binding principle of our social life. For him, Jesus tells mankind, you think that your laws correct evil, they only increase it. And that's the idea that when you say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, so you pretty much condone poking people's eyes out. And that leads me to the discussion of executions, of death penalty. I think there was one in Mississippi today, a fella who absolutely guilty. He admitted it, and he was so guilty that he did not want any appeals. So he's basically committing suicide by death penalty. And another one is maybe happening tomorrow, unless the governor of Oklahoma stops it. I just saw today that school kids in Oklahoma are walking out from school in protest. So, yeah. So that's the evil that's being perpetuated through this Old Testament version interpretation of the law. There is only one way of extirpating evil, to return good to all men without distinction. You have tried your principle for thousands of years. Try now mine, which is the reverse. Jesus is thus calling for his disciples to transcend lex talionis, which is this idea that punishment should be equal to the crime, so retaliation, in other words. To love and forgive evildoers, and so Jesus is thus calling for the disciples to transcend lex talionis, retaliation, to love and forgive evildoers in order for the cycle of violence which has blighted humanity to be overcome. For Christian anarchists, this cannot but require a rejection of state theory and practice. So, in other words, anarchists believe that the state is inherently evil, and as it manifests itself in the execution of these prisoners, it would be illegal for the victims' families to go and kill people, but for the state it is fine, it is okay. And Christian anarchists reject that idea. Moreover, they argue that the state also contravenes, or through it obliges its citizens to contravene the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. So in other words, not only does the state contravene the Sermon on the Mount, it also forces its citizens to do the same. For Christian anarchists, therefore, the sermon contains the most revolutionary teaching in the world. It calls for revolution by its implied criticism of the state, but it also instructs Christians on how to behave in order for them to lead that revolution. So there, again, those are repeat of the two themes of this chapter. The Sermon on the Mount is a criticism of the state, number one, and number two, it gives us instructions for how to live our lives. But it also instructs Christians on how to behave in order for them to lead that revolution. A revolution which, as the next chapter shows, Jesus further taught and practiced throughout the rest of his life. So this marks the end of chapter 1 in the book, which deals exclusively with the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is not the only place where Christian anarchists get their information. There are many other places, and we're going to find some of those in chapter 2. And again, you're going to need the book itself, the copy of the book, or perhaps you can get yourself a Bible and follow along that way. But we'll see. So next week we're going to kind of like dip our feet into chapter 2 of the book. It says, the anarchism implied in Jesus' other teachings and examples. So we're going to look at some of the other things that imply anarchism in the teachings of Jesus. Probably not going to go through all of them, but at least some of them. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week.